Good evening. It's so good to be here with you tonight, and that's too loud, right? I got it too close. I can back it up a little bit. I'm thankful for the opportunity to be here. Last night I got in a little bit of trouble because I forgot to pick my wife up at Brown's Grocery. So we were late. She called me. I was going down Ridgewood Road, and she said, "Where you at?" And I said, "I'm coming to pick you up." And she said, "Really?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "Where you at?" And I said, "Turning around." Well, this morning I thought she said, "I'm going to drive where I can get home quicker tonight to pack." So I was coming on to Liberty to pick some people up, and as I blew past Brown's, I saw her car. And I thought, oh no, I forgot again. The van will turn around really quick if you brake really hard and turn it really sharp. And I pulled up and she said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "Just saying hey." So I forget a lot of stuff. But I have enjoyed listening to the lessons that y'all have had this week. I like the theme Sunday night. The topic was we are a created masterpiece. Last night's topic was we are a called masterpiece, Daniel in the lion's den. And the topic that's been assigned to me tonight is we are a valued masterpiece. Luke chapter 15, the Prodigal Son, was what I was given to talk about. And if you want to go ahead and open your Bibles to Luke chapter 15, we'll begin there in a minute. Won't go all the way down to the Prodigal Son yet. We'll start in verse 1, but if you want to turn there, it'd be good. I want to ask you a question as we're turning there, and we'll talk about it a little later in the lesson, but think about just for a minute in your mind what determines the value of something. Could it be what it's made of? Would that determine the value? What about how useful a certain product is? Would that help determine its value? Maybe the age of something. If something's an antique or old, could that determine how valuable it is, or maybe how rare it is? What makes something valuable? As you're thinking about that, I want to tell you a story of something that happened to me last October. My wife's birthday is on a special day during October. It's really close to our anniversary and really close to my mother's birthday. I was working in Cumberland City, Tennessee, and we were on a bigger project, and we didn't have a lot of help. It was me and TD and an engineer, and we had a lot of work to do, and we had a pretty tight schedule we had to finish it on, so I couldn't really leave and be gone from the job. She was having to work also, so they couldn't come to Tennessee like they usually do if I'm out of town, where we could celebrate a birthday, so we agreed that we would meet in Florence. Our plan was she would pick up the boys, I would drive to Florence, and we would meet, and we'd eat at the 360 Grill, you know, the big restaurant that rotates over the dam. And we would stay the night in a Marriott hotel that night. And then I would go back to work the next day, and she would go back. Honestly, this place was a lot fancier than what I'm used to. It's a little above Full Moon, a little bit above Lee's Chicken. It's just a little bit fancier than what we're accustomed. I come straight from work, and I've got good work clothes, and I've got not so good work clothes, and I wore the good ones. And I took a shower on the way. Erin come in her clothes, and she picked the boys up, and they had their blue jeans on. And when we walked in on that Friday evening, everybody there was probably just a little more polished than we were. They were a little more elegant than what we were. Have you ever been in a place to where you immediately felt out of place? That was us. We felt completely out of place. We got on the elevator, went up to the top where the restaurant was, and as soon as the doors opened, the hostess was there at a desk, and there was a couple of people, the best I remember, in front of them. And if I mess some of this up, y'all won't know it, Aaron will, but I'm going to tell it as accurately as I can because it was pretty cool. There was a couple of people there in front of us, and the host looked at us, and I thought, yeah, we really don't belong. And she said, can I help you? And I said, yes, ma'am. I'm Brandon Glover, and we got reservations. And she said, well, I've got a couple of people. You'll have to wait just a minute, and we'll get you seated. Well, she sat down, or went back to her desk and got her little board out, and she looked, and she immediately put it down. She said, Mr. Glover, y'all come with us. I'm like, well, we get ahead of these people. She took us back to a table that was already set, and she set us down. And Robert, we didn't have one waitress, we had two. And I thought, well, this waitress is in training. They give us just constant attention the whole time, and I'm like, neither one of these are any better than the other. Both these waitresses are experienced. I don't think that's, so I'm looking at other tables, nothing's happening when my boys are sitting there, and they bring out this bottle of bubbly, sparkly water. I don't know what you call it, but it was looking like in a wine glass bottle. And they set it on the table, and I watched the boys as they poured it in their glass, and they took a drink of it, and I knew immediately I didn't want to try it. I could tell by the look on their face it was horrible. Grant, I believe, maybe it was Logan, they didn't have a salt shaker. They had a little dish that had salt in it, pink salt with a little bitty spoon. So instead of drinking their drink, he took a little bit of salt and he put it in the water. And all of a sudden it was like a volcano in the second grade. It started erupting. Well, he bent down and started sucking the foam off of it and saved it. Didn't make a mess. Well, Grant, Logan, and David saw it, so they're taking turns with a spoon and they're filling theirs up. And this water is erupting, they suck it off, and as soon as they get all the foam off of it, they take some more salt and they put it in there and it did nothing. So they realized the only way to get it to foam again, they had to get rid of the water to make it do it again, so they drank the water. And they put the salt in it again. Me and Aaron sitting there, and I thought, I'm just going to let them go. You know, they're looking at us weird anyway. Somebody else may want to try this themselves. Well, the waitress comes back, and she sees the bottle nearly gone, and she's like, oh, boys, y'all love this sparkly water. Let me get you some more. And she brings 2 more bottles out on the table. And I thought, man, I don't know how much that stuff cost. We're sitting there talking, me and her, and we just didn't care. But we've noticed something about these 2 waitresses that they didn't leave it, and it wasn't annoying. It was one and then the other one, and it was just constant attention to us. Well, they started bringing us out plates, and they said, we would like y'all to try samples that we're thinking about putting on our menu. And it was a little bitty piece of meat of some kind, and it had swirly stuff all over it. You know, my opinion was it's not big enough for a meal, and it could do without the swirlies. But they brought us that, and then they brought us desserts. And they're like, try these and let us know what you think. And I'm like, I look at Aaron and I said, nobody else is trying this stuff. They must think we can't pay for our meal. We all ordered steaks, and then they bring us out some bone marrow butter. I don't know if y'all have ever had that or not. But when they bring our food out, we don't have 2 waitresses now, we have 5. Each plate had a different waitress bring it to each person. And they stand over us, and they're like, what do you need? Steak sauce. But I'll tell them, no, we'll get it for you. What do you need? And I asked every one of us, and just give us just attention like you wouldn't believe. And I'm feeling kind of awkward, and I'm asking Erin, and she don't know, but we're just going to enjoy it for the moment. Then they come out and they said, would you like us to cut your steak for you? I'm like, I'm pretty tired. I ain't never had nobody cut my steak. Y'all ain't cut nobody else's steak. I thought they were going to feed us. Finally, at the end, one of the waitresses come back out. And she said, I just got to know. And I'm thinking I do too. She said, are y'all friends with Dean? Dean. She said, yeah, are y'all friends with Dean? I said, why do you ask? And she said, well, y'all are on the VIP list. So I figured y'all were friends with Dean. I'm like, well, we didn't want to cause no attention. You know, we're going to play it cool. We didn't want nobody to know who we were. And she walked away, and I started trying to Google who Dean was. I looked at Grant, and I said, boy, poke your chest out. We're on the VIP list. Are you a VIP? I didn't find out the next day. I called Chris the next day when I was driving back to Tennessee, tell him the story. And he said, let me guess, Dean needed a Bible study. I said, no. Well, I don't know who Dean is. We ain't figured him out. Come find out, Dean was a head chef. He had graduated from some big culinary school. And the Marriott had hired him to be over all their restaurants. And they had put him at the 360 grill to try to help boost their service. I was thinking something all the way back to Tennessee. You know, somehow they got us mixed up with somebody important. Some rednecks from Walker County had got mistaken for somebody important. My next thought was, what about the poor guy that was supposed to be on the VIP list? What happened to him? But I realized something. People treat you different when they think you have value. Right? They didn't want to talk to us when we come in. But when they saw we was on the VIP list, automatically everything changed. I'm telling y'all that as honest as I can remember, that's pretty close to that story, what happened. Spiritually speaking, that's exactly what we're talking about tonight. When we talk about a valued masterpiece, I want you to look in Luke chapter 15. But as we start talking about our topic, I want to understand why Jesus told the parable of the prodigal son to begin with. We talk about this parable all the time, and we've heard lessons, and when I seen it, I thought, oh no. How do you redo the prodigal son? Because so many lessons have been taught on it. But I want to look at why Jesus told it in the first place. I want to look at the context of this parable. If you will, let's look at the first verse in Luke chapter 15. Jesus begins this parable being surrounded by sinners. He's surrounded by tax collectors, messed up people with bad reputations. And look in verse 1, it said, then drew near unto him all the publicans and the sinners to hear him. And the Pharisees and the scribes started complaining. So they were murmuring and saying, can you believe this man received sinners? They were complaining at Jesus, not because he was teaching error. They were complaining because Jesus was receiving sinful people. Look at verse 2. Not only does this man receive sinners, he also eats with them. Are you kidding me? Jesus is eating with the sinners? I want you to think about that statement for a minute, because they're criticizing Jesus for welcoming and helping broken people. Jesus responds to how they're acting to him by telling three stories. He tells a story about a lost sheep. He tells a story about a lost coin, and then he tells a story about a lost son that we're going to talk about here in just a minute. And every one of those stories is talking about something valuable that was lost, but then it was found. But as we look at the lesson tonight, I don't want you to lose the focus on why Jesus told it to begin with. The focus wasn't on what was lost. The focus on the religious leaders. The focus was on the Pharisees. It was more about them, the people that they considered God's people. Tonight, I would imagine there's three types of people in here. And I hope this lesson will apply to all three. That was the intent. First of all, there's probably some people in here tonight who deep down really struggle with feeling like you belong. You might have come in this building and it was hard for you to walk in that door. And you're sitting in this pew and you feel like you just don't belong here. Maybe somebody invited you, maybe your kids wanted to come, and so maybe you felt like you just needed to be here, but inside it's tearing you up. Maybe you're carrying shame, maybe you've got mistakes in your life, maybe some things have happened in your past that you wish nobody knew about. Sad part is somebody probably does. Maybe you look around church sometimes and you think, man, all these people are so put together. They got it going on, and I'm struggling just to be here. I've heard that so many times. You love God. You just feel unworthy. I hope this lesson impacts you tonight. I know this group of people's here. A group of people that's just genuinely trying to serve the Lord faithfully. You're trying your hardest to do what God wants you to do. You're not perfect, but you're trying. You pray. You fight off temptation. When you mess up, you ask forgiveness. You want to grow. You want to improve in your life, but you realize just how far you have to go sometimes, and maybe we'll get discouraged. I hope this lesson's for you also. But then there's a third group of people, and honestly, a lot of us may fall into it also. It's probably the most dangerous one, and I'd be lying and wrong if I said I wasn't part of it at some time in my life. There's people here who are a little more like the Pharisees. There may be people here who are a little more like the older son, the older brother. We don't want to admit it, but maybe deep down we feel like we're a little more spiritually superior. Maybe you've been in church a long time. Maybe we use the phrase where they grew up in the church as if some way or another that makes you spiritually superior. Maybe you should be more knowledgeable. Maybe you've never been caught up in what we would call those terrible sins that we can see other people commit. Maybe we compare ourselves to others and quietly think, boy, at least I've never done that. That's easy to do sometimes, right? If we're not really careful, we get really good at seeing the sins of the prodigal son, and we completely miss the older brother. One of the sons run away rebelling from the father. The other stayed near the father, but his heart drifted away from him. The amazing thing about Luke chapter 15 is Jesus got a message for both the sons. He's got a message for all three groups of people. You know, it's important for us to correctly understand our value. We don't need our value placed too low, but it's just as dangerous for our value to be placed too high. We need to make sure that our value is correct where God wants it to be. And if it's not, we need to change it. According to Romans chapter 1, verse 16, it says the gospel is God's power to save the lost. But let me tell you what else the gospel can do. It can also humble the proud if you'll apply it. The prodigal son thought, I no longer deserve to be called a son. The older brother thought, I deserve more than everybody else. Both of them were wrong. Both of them misunderstood the heart of the Father. Prodigal son reached a point where he no longer believed he had any value. But I'm going to tell you, and you're going to see tonight, the Father never stopped seeing the value in the Son. No matter where he was, he saw his value. First point we're going to make tonight is we'll begin in verse 11 of chapter 13. But I want you to notice that the prodigal son lost sight of his value. In verse 11, Jesus begins by saying, he said, a certain man had two sons. And the young one said to his father, said, Father, you give me my inheritance. You give me the portion of goods that belongs to me. So his father divided the goods. He divided his living. And it wasn't long after that, the son gathered up all the stuff that he had, and he went on a journey into a far country. And he blew it. And said he wasted everything on riotous living. I want you to notice something, and I hope you'll remember it. The son wanted the father's stuff, but the son didn't want the father. And before we're too critical of the son, we need to think about ourselves. Sometimes we want God's blessings without obedience. Sometimes we pray for God to give us peace. God, I need that peace that passes all understanding, but I don't want to repent. Sometimes we want heaven, and maybe we don't want to surrender. We want the Father's stuff. We just don't really want the Father. The son leaves home convinced that there's freedom out there somewhere else other than with his father. Sin always overpromises and underdelivers. Always. We tell our kids stuff like this, and we're like, boy, if you just listen, but man, ain't we the same as parents sometimes? We can get caught up in stuff, and that sin overpromises and underdelivers. I want you to look at verse 14. It said, when he spent everything he had, he blew it all, and there arose a mighty famine in the land, and he was hungry. That he began to be in want. But what could he do? He went and joined himself with a citizen of that country. And that citizen said, hey, the only job I got for you to do is you can go feed my pigs. So he sent him into the field to feed the swine. Verse 16 said, he would have fain have filled his belly with a husk. I believe we said he would have ate the slop if they would have let him. But it looks to me like the citizen wouldn't let him have any. How bad is that? Now, this prodigal son's feeding the pigs. And for a Jewish audience, this is rock bottom. I'm trying to picture myself as these Pharisees and these religious leaders as Jesus is telling this parable, and I imagine they're thinking, oh, feeding pigs. Ain't no hope for that guy no more. Hope you remember something else. The farther the son got away from the Father, the lower his value becomes. The farther we get from the Father, the less we value ourselves. We look at people sometimes and we don't understand, but this is what sin does. Sin don't just dirty people. You know, we talk a lot, you hear it in different places about identity crisis. They've got an identity crisis, or there's an identity crisis today. Sin distorts your identity. You forget who you are and you forget what you're worth. Let me illustrate. A few years ago, several years ago, I don't see TD in here, probably around somewhere. I had to call him, asked him a name, but several years ago I did some work for the Jasper Waterworks. We did some work for the city, and they called us to do some work at the sewer plant. I don't know if you know exactly what's in the sewer plant, but Rick, it starts with an S and it ends with a ooage. Raw sewage. Everything that gets flushed down a toilet, everything that gets sent down the sink that you can imagine in Jasper goes to this one place in the sewer plant. And they process it. There was a guy there named Alex Bale when we were there. He was the manager. Do you know him? Is he still alive? Okay. This guy loved his job. Great guy. I mean, he was an outstanding guy, but when you walked in his office, he had this big shadow box, maybe, I don't know what you'd call it, of stuff that he got out of the sewer and he put in that box. He had rings. He had necklaces. He had bracelets. He had all kind of coins. He had all kind of whatnots. I mean, my boys would have loved it. He cleaned it before he put it in the box. But he had all this stuff in this box for when people come in that they could see. But you know what else? He got a lot of out of the sewer? Cash. He would brag about all the cash he got out of the sewer, and she would tell you the same thing. Let me ask you something. If I pulled a $100 bill out of the raw sewage, what would it look like to you? I can see the look. Disgusting, right? I meant to ask there, and I forgot. Somebody we knew would say disgusting, but they wouldn't say disgusting. They couldn't say it. They'd call it busgusting. So when something's really bad around the house, we say it's busgusting. Well, the $100 bill coming out of the raw sewage was busgusting, right? It was dirty. We would say contaminated. But you know something? I about guarantee you I could take that $100 bill and I could clean it up. And I could come in here and I could hold it in front of each one of y'all. And I don't care how big a germaphobe you are, you're going to figure out a way to take that $100 bill. You may be thinking, I'll swap it for another one later. I won't keep that one, and you'll get one from the Chicago sewer. Probably it's been cleaned up. Put your money in your mouth again. It happened. Why would you take that money when I cleaned it up? Because being in the sewer changed its condition. But you know what it didn't change? The value. A $100 bill in the sewer is still worth $100. Right? That's exactly what sin does to us. I want you to think about this when you look at somebody and maybe you want to look down on them just a little bit. And you realize what God sees. Sin dirties people. It stains people and it leaves people ashamed. Sometimes sin leaves people in places they never imagined they'd be. Some of y'all look surprised when I said there was $100 bills in the sewer plant. It ain't supposed to be there. But they are. Sometimes sin leaves people in addiction. Sometimes it leaves them in immorality. Sometimes it leads to depression, regret. It may be easy to look down on those people, and after a while, those people start believing that. They start believing that I'm not worth anything anymore because what sin has done to their life. I want you to understand that the pig pen didn't erase the prodigal son's value. It didn't change it. And your failures don't erase your value either. You know, I know these car guys here. And it's funny, we can see a car that's rusted. Looks like it's no good. If it's something we like or want, we're going to be like, I want that car so I can restore it, right? I can make that car back to what it originally was or even better. Oh yeah, it looks like a piece of junk to you, but you wait till I get through with it. God knows the difference between something that's worthless and something that just needs to be restored. That's what he says his people need when they get in that condition. They need to be restored. I want you to notice what the Father didn't say in Luke 15. He didn't say throw him away. He said, let's bring him a robe. His Father still saw his value even when he was covered in filth. At the beginning of this lesson, I told you about us being treated like VIPs by mistake. God don't make mistakes. I mean, really and truly, we were VIPs. They might not have knew it. God never makes a mistake about our value. He knows exactly who we are. Second thing I want to look at tonight, if we go down to verse 17. The son expected to be rejected. I didn't mean for that to rhyme. Maybe the son expects rejection, whichever one fits better with you. Verse 17 said, when the son came to himself, he said, you know, I wonder how many hired servants at my dad's house have got plenty of bread to eat and they're throwing some away. And I'm sitting here starving to death. Can't even get slop from the pigs, and they throwing it away. He said, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to get up and I'm going to go to my father and I'm going to say, Father, I've sinned. I've sinned against heaven, and not only have I sinned against heaven, I've sinned against you too. He said, I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. You ain't even got to act like I'm your son no more. Just make me as a hired servant. Because I promise you that's a better life than what I've got now. You notice this speech that this son prepared. He said, you make me a hired servant. Why? Because shame always convinces people they need to be away from God. Sometimes you wonder why people won't come to church. Sometimes it ain't just a rebellion. It's because the shame has made them think that they don't need to be here, that they can't be here. And if we change the way we look at people, we'll change the way we reach people. I'm sure there's people sitting in the pews probably tonight thinking the same thing. Maybe they feel like God just tolerates me. I really don't deserve to be here. But I want you to watch a father here in verse 20. Father never loses sight of his son's value. It said he arose, the son did, and he came to his father. But when he was yet a great way off, his father saw him and he had compassion. And he ran and he fell on his neck and he kissed him. And said when he was a great way off, that means the father was watching. But something I didn't know that a couple of years ago, I was studying this section. I probably heard it and overlooked it, but it said the father runs. And in that culture, a dignified man did not run. Nothing scared him that bad, and nothing made him that happy. He'll get there when he gets there. But the love of the Father outrun his dignity. The Son may have forgotten the Father, but the Father never forgot the Son. He was waiting on him. The son came back with a speech that he's going to be a servant. And the father said, no, son, we're going to restore you. We're going to put you back like you was. Look at verse 22. But the father said to the servant, bring forth the best robe, put it on him, put a ring on his hand, put some shoes on his feet. The robe could represent honor. He got his place of honor back. The ring, without a doubt, was his authority. His sonship is restored, and his shoes could represent his freedom, right? Servants and slaves didn't wear shoes much, but the son did. He said, get some shoes and put on this boy's feet. Father said, you're not going to return as a slave. You're going to return back as a son. 5 after, what time we? Prodigal thought that I'd lost my place in the family. Father never thought about removing him as a son. You want to turn to Romans chapter 8. The New Testament teaches us something really incredible. That when we come to Christ, we're not just merely forgiven, even though that's huge. It says we're adopted. Romans chapter 8, verse 15 says, for ye have not received the spirit of bondage again to fear, but you have received the spirit of adoption, whereby we cry, Abba, Father. The Spirit itself bears witness with our spirit that we're children of God, and if we're children, then we're heirs. And we're heirs of God. And not only are we heirs of God, we're joint heirs of Christ. We talk about identity. This is probably one of the greatest identity passages in the Bible. You think about adoption for just a minute. Haley and Corey had a baby. But when you're adopted, you were chosen. Right? Somebody said, I want that baby. When you're adopted, it means that you're wanted. It means that you're brought into the family. Then he says, if we're children, then we're heirs, heirs of God, and joint heirs with Christ. I want you to think about that just a minute. He said, we're joint heirs of Christ. That means everything that Christ is going to receive, we receive it through Him. I can't wrap my mind around that, but I know it's great. Talk about value. How does God value us? That night at the restaurant, they treated us special because they thought we belonged to somebody important. I'm going to tell you something tonight. If you're a Christian, you do belong to somebody important. Much more important than Dean. What's his name? Not because of your money, not because of status, not because of you're perfect. It's because of a relationship. They thought we were special because we had a relationship with Dean. We're special because we got a relationship with God. Ephesians chapter 2:10, I know y'all have heard it all this week, but it says, we are His workmanship, created in Christ Jesus unto good works, which God hath before ordained that we should walk in them. That word workmanship comes from the idea of this crafted masterpiece. God says, you're my workmanship. I made you special. Everybody special. Think about that the next time we feel like we need to look down on somebody else. We're a work of art. God don't create junk. The devil tells us we're worthless. God says, hey, you're my workmanship. The world says, hey, we need to throw them away. God says, no, they just need to be restored. I can fix it. Last point. The older brother also had a value problem. Look in verse 25. But now, the older son was in the field. As he was coming up to the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants. He said, man, what's going on? What means this stuff that I hear? And he said to him, he said, your brother's come home, and your father, man, he's so happy, he killed the fatted calf. He's so happy because your brother's come back home and he's safe and sound. The older son was angry. That he was mad and he wasn't about to go in the house. So his father comes out to him. And he said, son, what's wrong? And he said, all these years I've served you. All these years I did exactly what you told me to do. All these years I've sat in the pew. You never gave me a kid. And you never gave me a party for my buddies. The younger brother felt like he was unworthy. The older brother felt like he was superior. Dad, you ought to treat me different because where I've been. Hell, I've been here all my life. And I ain't did none of the bad stuff he's done. Both of them misunderstood the Father. I asked you in the beginning, what determines value? The truth is, it don't matter so much what it's made of. It don't matter how old it is. I've had some stuff I've made before that I thought was the most useful thing in the world that I couldn't sell to nobody. You know what determines value? How much you're willing to pay for it. You get so aggravated, people say, I'm trying to sell my car and I'm going to get $20,000 because I seen one on Marketplace for $20,000. And I'm like, there's a difference between the asking price and the selling price, right? Tell me what it sold for, because that's what it's worth. We can ask anything we want to for it, but what was really paid for it determines the value of anything. Romans chapter 5 verse 8 said, God commended his love toward us in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Justin stole my line last night. I ain't giving my son for any of y'all, I don't think. But God said, you're that valuable. I'm going to give my son for you. What's your value? The greater the price that is paid, the greater the value of the object. Sometimes we don't recognize the value of people because we see the dust. Trying to make sure I finish on time. You may be here tonight and you may feel like you're just spiritually exhausted. You may be here and feel like you're ashamed. You may feel like you're out of place. You may feel like you're forgotten. You might feel like you're in the wrong room spiritually. But the gospel says, hey, we got a table back here prepared for you. Come sit down. Chris used this verse in a joke he told a couple of weeks ago when he was preaching, but Revelation 3:20, Jesus said, behold, I stand at the door and knock. If you'll hear my voice, and if you'll open the door, he said, I'll come in and I'll eat with you and you can eat with me. God's still seeking people. He still calls people. He still welcomes people. You know, the prodigal son came back thinking that he was going to be on probation. But instead, he got a party. Tonight, you may feel a little bit like the prodigal son. You might have wandered too far from the Father. You might have made some decisions that you really regret, but somewhere along the way, you start believing you're not worth anything anymore. God says you still got value. There may be somebody here tonight that felt like we did when we walked in that restaurant. When the son come back, God didn't say, hey, you got to prove yourself. Or the Father didn't. God don't tell us. The Father didn't say, boy, do you realize what kind of shame you brought on this family? He welcomed him back and he restored him back to his place. He didn't say, boy, you've really embarrassed us. He said, bring him a robe. Why? Because he never lost his value. I hope tonight I've encouraged you to see your value as God sees it. Not too high, not too low. Just the way God sees it. And I hope more than anything you'll see the value in other people, just as God sees it, not too high and not too low. You may be the prodigal, or you may be the older brother. You may have a problem with pride. We can fix it. You got an invitation, son? 673. God is calling a prodigal. Maybe you've never put on Christ. What a great night to do that. We'll be happy to talk to you, study with you. We'll be happy to baptize you into Christ tonight. Maybe you're like the younger son who drifted away from the father. And maybe your identity is worthless. Or maybe you're like the older brother in the Pharisees and you need to make a change. We'd love for you to come.